Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf 34, Daf Lamed Daled, Daf 34 of Masechta Beitzah. Friends, who could tell me what today's Daf talks about? So today's Daf, the first part we talk about, the Mishnah had said that you're not allowed to heat up like a tile in order to cook on that tile. The question is, why not? We're going to see two possibilities, and then we get to a new Mishnah. Super interesting stuff, in my opinion, which is Shabbos being machshiv ochel. Super interesting. How like eating on Shabbos is like super like choshev, gives like a lot of significance to the food that's being eaten on Shabbos, and there is actual real nafkaminas potentially regarding trumas and maisvus. Just because you're planning to eat something on Shabbos, you know, the significance of the fact that it's going to be eaten on Shabbos may possibly actually have nafkaminas in terms of chiyuvs for trumas and maiser from tevel, things like that. It's super interesting stuff. Let's start over here on Daf Lamed Gimel Beis. 3 lines from the bottom. So the Mishnah had said that you're not allowed to make, if you have like tiles, you can't make them super duper hot and then cook on them. So, Frak the Gemara, my Ovid, what's the problem? Why can't you make the tiles super duper hot and then cook on them? Oh, wah. Friends, you hear that? It's gewaldig. It says Rav Bar Chana, the name of Yochanan, that we're talking about brand new tiles. Mipnei shetzarich levodkon. V'amilam mipnei shetzarich lechasman. Wah. So we have two possibilities over here, okay? So again, the Mishnah had said that you cannot take a tile, make the tile super duper hot, and then cook on that tile. The question is, right, meaning put it in fire and then cook on the tile. Meaning, again, take the tile, stick it into fire, fire is going to make the tile like super duper hot, and then you'll take like, I don't know, maybe crack an egg on there, I guess, and like cook on it. You're not allowed to do that. The question is, why not? So we give two possible answers. So the first answer is that, well, because how do you know that this tile is going to be able to withstand the heat, right? Kilu, if you're going to be checking, if you're going to be putting this new tile, right? We're talking about new tiles, and if you're putting this new tile into the fire, what if the tile is unable to handle the heat? So then it might break, and if it breaks, then you did a tircha on Shabbos for no reason, on Yom Tov for no reason, and therefore that is why you're not allowed to heat up this tile and cook on it, because we're talking about a new tile, and we don't know that the tile will actually be able to withstand the heat, and therefore we say avoid it. And the other option is that, well, actually the first time that you, meaning when you form a tile from, I don't know, what do you make it from, like mud, like it's earthenware or something like that, and then the first time you put it into the fire, it makes it stark, it makes it strong, it strengthens the tile, and therefore that's essentially like being masakin kli. It's like, you know, it's like fixing the kli to make it properly, to make it properly into a kli. So then we don't want you doing that on Yom Tov. I assume that the point is because you probably could have done it before Yom Tov, and therefore you can't do it on Yom Tov. Okay, so two possible answers. So we say you're not allowed to cook on these tiles that you heat up really hot. We said because we're talking about new tiles, and there's two possibilities for what can happen with these new tiles. One is that the tile might break, and if it breaks, then you ended up just doing a tircha, a burden on a burden, something on Yom Tov for no reason. And the second one is that actually the first time that you put this tile into fire, it actually strengthens it and like makes it into a proper vessel, and then so therefore we don't want you doing that on Yom Tov. Says the Gemara Tanan Hosam, we learned over there in Chulin, Darsa, if you have a fagel, you have a bird, and you trampled on it, or shetarfa bakotel, or you slammed it against the wall, or she'irtzatz the behema, or that an animal crushed it. Umifarkeses, and it's what was mifarkeses? It's kind of like flopping around, I guess. It's like stumbling around. Vishasa me'esleis, and it survived another 24 hours. v'shachat hakshera, and then you slaughtered it, it's kosher. So you have this bird, and it's not in good shape. I mean, somebody accidentally trampled on it, or slammed it against the wall, or another animal, crushed it. Like, it's not in a good situation. Now, so the Tanna Kama says that v'shasa me'es leis v'shachat hakshera. As long as you wait 24 hours and it survives those first 24 hours, so then you can assume that it has not become a treifa on account of its injuries, right? Because of course an animal that's a treifa, an animal that is not going to be able to live out the year, you are not allowed to eat. It's treif, you're not allowed to eat it. So here you have this animal this bird that was perfectly healthy, but it got crushed, or somehow something very significant happened to it physically. So it got crushed or trampled or whatever it is. So the Tanna Kama says, look, if it survives 24 hours, then it's good enough. Then you can be assured it's not a treifa. Omer Belazar b'Bianai Mishum Belazar ben Antigonus, says Belazar b'Bianai, in the name of Belazar, quoting Belazar ben Antigonus, tzricha b'dika, that even if it survives 24 hours, you still need to check it. Meaning that after you slaughter, so meaning even if it survives 24 hours, and then you slaughter it, you still need to check the bird to, make sure that you don't find any signs of trephos after you slaughter it by opening up the bird, that you don't find any other indications that it would be a treifa, because says Belazar b'Bianai that there are certain things that, if it survives 24 hours, then you can assume that, those are not issues. But there are other things that even if it survives 24 hours, you can really only tell if it's going to be a treifa by opening it up and checking it afterwards. So therefore, says Belazar b'Bianai, quoting Belazar ben Antigonus, that tzricha b'dika, even if it survives 24 hours, you still need to do some checks after you slaughter it to make sure that it is not a treifa. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah asks a kasha from Reb Zera, Ma'u l'shachta b'yom tov. Oh, now this bird that got trampled or whatever it is, it survived 24 hours. Can you slaughter it on Yom Tov? Mimachzikinan reisa b'yom tov olo. Do we say that, look, this bird is not in good condition. It was trampled. Sure, it survived 24 hours, but it's not in good condition. We don't want to take a chance on it, because if you slaughter the bird, and then it turns out to be a treifa, well, then you just did a tircha for no reason, right? You slaughtered a bird for no reason. So, so do we say, so in general, if you take a healthy chicken or whatever, you slaughter a chicken on Yom Tov, so there's no reason to assume that it's a treifa. So therefore we can sort of take a calculated risk and say, look, we're slaughtering a chicken, chances are it's kosher, so that's fine. But in this case where, do we say, look, we already have reason to assume that this chicken might be a treifa or this bird might be a treifa, so do we say, refrain from slaughtering it on Yom Tov, or do we say, look, it's really not that big of a deal, you can slaughter this bird on Yom Tov. Amalei, Tonino, to which Reb Zera says, look, we have our Mishnah. What does our Mishnah say? That you're not allowed to heat up these tiles in order to cook on the tiles. And we ask, and we ask, well, what's the problem with heating up these tiles and then cooking on them? From Rabbi Babachana and Rabbi Yochanan. And Rabbi Babachana says, well, the problem is that we're talking here about new tiles. And the new tiles, we don't know yet if it might be a the new tiles, we don't know if they could handle the heat. They might not be able to handle the heat. They haven't been tested yet. We have to check it first. We haven't been able to check it yet. And therefore, you're not allowed to heat up these tiles. And therefore, the same thing would apply here as well. If we're saying that you have this bird that is not in good shape, it got trampled, right? Even if it survives 24 hours, but we're saying that you have to, at least according to Rabbi Belazar b'Bianai, you still have to check it in order to make sure it's not a treifa. And therefore, we'll say, well, just like you're not allowed to heat up this tile because it hasn't been confirmed yet. We still have to check it. And therefore you can't heat up the tile because maybe it'll break. So then Reb Zera argues that we'll say the same thing also by the bird, that you would not be allowed to slaughter on Yom Tif because it's a risk. Because what if it turns out you can't check it until after you slaughter it, and we have to be concerned that just like the tile, what if the tile is going to be unable to withstand the heat and it'll break? So here also, what if this bird ends up being a treifa, and you won't be able to use the bird, to eat the bird, and therefore Reb Zera learns from our Mishnah that you should not slaughter the fagel. Omar le, to which Rabbi Yirmiyah responds to Reb Zera, to which Rabbi Yirmiyah responds, and he says, well, there were two possibilities there. The point, when it comes to the tile, we had said that when it comes to the tile, that, well, it hasn't been checked yet. That was just one opinion. Says Rabbi Yirmiyah that he actually goes like the opinion that says that the problem with the tile is that you're strengthening it the first time you put it in the fire. That was the problem. It wasn't necessarily a problem about the fact that it hasn't been checked yet, and therefore it's not necessarily a proof. We can't bring it as a proof to teach us whether we can slaughter this bird that we're going to have to check to see if it's a treifa. So it looks like it's kind of inconclusive to bring a proof from our Mishnah. Tanya, we learn in a Beitzah, Echad mevias ha'or. Okay, if you have one fellow who on Yom Tif brings fire, V'echad mevias ha'eitzim, and one fellow brings wood, V'echad shofes sakadera, one fellow puts the pot on the fire. Or maybe this is talking about on Shabbos actually. Maybe so, or if one person brings the fire, and one person brings the wood, and one fellow puts the pot on the fire, and one person brings water, another person puts in spices, and one of them mixes, stirs, kulan chayovin. Okay, so they're all chayovin. So basically you have all these people who are playing different roles in this cooking, essentially. Somebody's bringing fire, somebody's bringing a pot, somebody's bringing water, spices, stirring, all sorts of stuff, and they kind of all come together to cook whatever they're planning to cook. So kulan chayovin. So they're all of them, all of the participants are chayovin. They're all doing something wrong on Shabbos. But we learn in a Beitzah, one second, we have another Beitzah that says in the same situation, one person brings the fire, one person brings the pot, one person brings the water, etc. Only the last person is chayiv. Everybody else is potter. Lokasha, we say it's no problem. Okay, we say, well, it depends when you bring the fire. If the first thing to come is the fire, well, then everybody else with their contributions are adding on to that, right? You start with the fire, then you bring on the pot and the water and the spices, and you mix it, so everyone's doing something wrong already because you had the fire there from the beginning, and everyone's essentially cooking. However, if the fire comes at the end, so what do you have? Somebody brought a pot, somebody brought water, somebody brought spices. I mean, nobody's really doing anything wrong. It's only once the fire comes that things are going to get exciting. So when we say that only the last person is chayiv, that is when the fire comes at the end. When we say that everybody's chayiv, that is when the fire came first. Now, bishlama kulu ka'avde mais. So we say, look, I understand why everybody's chayiv, right? Somebody brings the water and he's heating up water. Somebody brings the spices, he's contributing to the cooking, and stirring is contributing to the cooking, and bringing the fire. Like, I understand why these people are doing something wrong. One thing I don't understand, says the Gemara, is what's the deal with the guy who takes the pot and he puts it on the fire? What's the problem with that? What's he doing? He's not cooking. He's not making a fire. He's taking a pot, putting it on a fire. There's nothing in the pot right now. What's he doing wrong? Reb Shimon ben Lakish says, we say, well, you know what he's doing? It's a new pot. And when you put that new pot on the fire, it's going to strengthen it. And just like when it comes to the tiles, you're not allowed to put the tiles, you're not allowed to heat up the tile and then cook on that because you're going to be strengthening the tile. So just like that's a problem, when this fellow takes a pot and puts it on the fire, he's also strengthening the pot and creating a problem, and he's going to be chayav for that. Taner Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Taner v'chirayim chadashim. If you have a new oven or a new stove, like a double oven, right? A taner is like, like a cone kind of thing with the top clipped off, and you put one pot on it. A kirayim is basically more like a rectangle with two kind of rectangle, like on like, I don't know, lying down, and you have like two openings where you could put two pots. So basically like a oven is like for one pot, and a kirayim is like for two pots. Chadashim, I guess the oven also you could put stuff in it, but I think the big difference that the oven has like one hole on top, and the stove is two. Chadashim arein kechol akelim anitolim bechatzer. Okay, so you have this new oven and this new stove, so you can move them around in the chatzor because you can use it to sit on it. Okay, aval in sachin osam shemen, but you can't put oil on it and rub oil on it. Vein tashin osam b'matlis, or take some kind of a rag and smear stuff on it. Vein mefigin osam betzonin, and don't like put cold water on it. Because that'll be like strengthening it, I think. Yeah, exactly. Don't put cold water on it in order to strengthen the oven, right? Because we're talking about chadash, we're talking about new ones. But if the reason why you're putting the cold water on it is just to sort of cool it down so that you'll be able to continue baking with it, well then that's going to be okay. All right, but again, we see that you shouldn't be strengthening these kelim on Yom Tif. These new kelim on Yom Tif. Taner Rabbanan, the rabbis taught Mogen es harosh. You can boil the head, v'saraglaim, and the legs. Okay, so if you have an animal and you kind of cut it up and you want to remove the hair and stuff like it, so you could boil the head, you could boil the legs. Umehavavin osan, or you could singe them in fire. Aval ein toflin osan b'charsis, but you can't cover them in charsis, v'lo ba'adom, not with earth, v'lo b'sid, and not with lime or plaster. Vein goes in osan b'misparayim, you can't cut off the hairs with scissors because it looks like you want to hold on to them for longer or something. Vein goes in a sayerik b'tisporish lo, and you can't, if you have like a vegetable or something that, even if it was already like picked from before Yom Tov, but if you use like regular scissors to kind of remove the like dead leaves from it, so it might look like you kind of harvested it on Yom Tov, which we don't want you to do. But you can akavios, but you can prepare kundis and akavios with like types of types of like yamina yirakos and sheish torach b'tikuna. These like certain vegetables that are pain in the neck to kind of prepare. You could prepare them. Umesikin v'ofen v'purni. You can light and also bake in like a big oven, not like a small oven, a big oven that opens from the sides. I guess similar to like our ovens. Chamen ba'antike, and you can heat up water in this antiki water heater vessel. Vein ofen b'forni chadash shematifchas, but don't bake in like a new oven. Right, this like big oven. Don't use a new one of these purnes, these big ovens, shematifchas, so that it shouldn't crack. All right, sounds fun. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught a nofkin b'mapuach. You can't like pump air with a bellows. Aval nofkin b'shfoferes, but you can blow like onto a fire with a tube. Vein misakin s'ashapod ve'mechad denoso, and you can't fix a skewer and you can't sharpen the skewer. All right, at least assuming, unlike Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can prepare machshirei ochel nefesh, but I guess according to this opinion, you cannot. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught ein mifatzin es akone. You can't crack a reed, litzlos bow, in order to cook with it maliach, a salty fish. So if you have like a salty fish that you want to cook and you want to put like some kind of reed between like the like, I don't know, pan and the fish, so you can't crack the reed in order to do that. You can crack a nut with a like cloth, and you don't have to be concerned that maybe the cloth will rip. That would be okay, because it's not korei almanas litpor, right? In order, right, it has to be a productive activity on Shabbos, and if you tear something, you're only mechayev really if you're tearing it in order to then sew it back together. But over here, you're just tearing it by accident because you're like trying to crack a nut. So I guess that would be okay. Okay, sounds fun to me. Does it sound fun to you? Sounds, yeah, probably. Okay, and now we get to a new Mishnah. I think it's kind of an interesting Mishnah. It's kind of technical, but it's like also kind of interesting, I think. So it says the Mishnah, Vod Amar Eliezer, and additionally it says Rabbi Eliezer in the previous Mishnah. Additionally, it says over here, Omid Adam ala Muktzeh Erev Shabbos b'Shvius. Okay, a fellow could stand over something that's Muktzah on Erev Shabbos and Shemitah. So we gave an example, right? So interestingly, so the classic example of Muktzah is like these figs and raisins that you said, you know what, I'm going to make them into, dried figs and dried grapes. I don't know why anybody would dry figs. I mean, fresh figs are just about the most delicious things there are. Although maybe because it's a short season, so maybe you want to preserve them for later because, and the season for fresh figs isn't that long, I guess. But anyways, so let's say you put out some grapes to dry or some figs to dry. So we had said maybe like a week or two ago that, so you take like the figs and the raisins and you put them on the roof. So obviously immediately when you put them on the roof, so they're still edible. But then they go through a phase where like they're not edible, like they're like rotten. And then once it gets through that phase, it then gets to a place where it's the product that you want. It's a dried fig or a dried raisin, and now you can eat it. So now we had said about a week or two ago that it gets to there comes a point where the figs are like, and the raisins, whatever it is, they're at this point where it can kind of go either way. Some people eat them, some people don't, right? They're still a little bit rotten for some people, but they're good enough for other people. So we said, well, in this case, you're at this stage where it can kind of go either way. So you gotta, if you want to eat it on Shabbos, you have to set it aside. Okay? So, Omid Adam ala Muktzeh, a person can stand over these, let's just stick with figs, these figs that are kind of almost dry, but not quite there, not quite unanimously dry. So you have to set them aside. Erev Shabbos on Friday, Bashvius, during Shemitah, we're in Shemitah now. So now on Shemitah, you don't have to separate Trumas and Maisus. On Shemitah, you don't have to separate Trumas and Maisus. So, because everything's Hefker, and you don't have to separate Trumas and Maisus. So, basically, the only issue with these figs are that they're muksa, right? Because they're at a point where, some people eat them, some people don't. So therefore, you don't have to worry about Trumas and Maisus. The fact that you didn't yet separate Trumas and Maisus, don't worry about that. Because it's Shemitah. The only issue is that, they're muk. They would be, not everybody eats them now. So, the Omer, and he says, Mikan ani ochel l'machar, and he says, look, I'm going to eat these tomorrow, and by saying that he's going to eat them the next day, so he set them aside, and now they're no longer going to be muksa tomorrow. The rabbis are a little bit more stringent, and they say, it's not enough to just say, I'm going to be eating these tomorrow. You actually have to delineate, which fruits you're going to be eating the next day. Okay, beseder. Now, very interesting Gemara. Tanan awesome. We learned in a Mishnah in Maisrus. Tinokus shetomnu te'enim me'erev Shabbos. So if you have these children, and they set aside figs on Erev Shabbos. Now, these are not dried figs. These are regular, fresh figs on Erev Shabbos. Now, the thing is, they hadn't yet separated Trumas and Maisus, right? V'shachachu v'lo isru. They didn't yet separate Trumas and Maisus. Now, this was out in the field, right? What does it say? It says, "Tinoku te'enim me'erev Shabbos." They put aside, right, in the field. It wasn't, because once already, if they would take these figs, and they're not planning on drying these figs, they're just planning on eating these figs. If they would take these figs and bring them into their house, so then, right, there's a concept of roe pnei abayis, that once these figs would sort of be brought into their house, so then memela they'd be chayiv and trumas and maisus. Now, as long as they haven't been taken yet into the house, so then so then you can eat them in a temporary way. You could just pick them up off the field and just eat them in a temporary way. So now that's what we're talking about. We're talking about these figs that are basically ready to be eaten, and you can eat them in the field in sort of a temporary way. But once you bring them into the house, they're going to be chayiv in meiser. So now Tanan also we learned over there in meiser. So I'm reading this over. Tinokes shetagnu te'enim erev Shabbos. So it's on a Friday, and you have these kids. And they set aside some of these figs. And as Rashi points out, even though they're kids, because they're, clearly showing that they have das, that they have intellect to know that they have to set aside these figs so that they won't, I don't know, is the issue, muktzah right now? Yeah, I don't think we're talking about muktzah right now because, these figs are ready to be eaten, so I don't think they're muktzah, but these kids, they basically, took the, imperative, took the, I don't know, they went ahead and they took these figs and they set them aside and they said, look, we're going to put these aside to enjoy tomorrow on Shabbos. Now again, we're talking about figs out in the field. Technically speaking, you can eat them in a temporary manner. They haven't yet set Trumas Meisus. And it says, V'shachachu v'lo isru, and they made a mistake and they didn't separate Trumas Meisus. L'motzoi Shabbos lo yochlu ela imkein isru. Now, on Shabbos and even on Motzei Shabbos, you're not going to be able to eat them until you separate Trumas and Meisus. And the reason for that is because Shabbos gives significance to this, these figs. Right? What does Rashi say? Rashi says, Achilas Shabbos chashuva va'arai shela areyu keva. Friends, you hear that? That the eating that you do on Shabbos is very significant. And even the temporary eating on Shabbos is considered, keva is considered fixed, right? And while these figs that are out in the field, you'd be allowed to eat in a temporary manner, but if you eat them in a permanent manner, so then you would have to separate Trumas and Meisus. And the fact that these children set aside these figs to be eaten on Shabbos, so they're basically bumping it up a level and giving it the status as though it was set aside to be eaten in a permanent manner, and therefore you have to separate Trumas and Meisus, and therefore they're not going to be able to eat these figs on Shabbos because they didn't yet separate Trumas and Meisus. And even on Motzoi Shabbos, when it's no longer Shabbos, the fact that they had set aside these figs to eat them on Shabbos, that gives them forever now sort of the status of kavua, of proper eating, and therefore you have to separate Trumas and Meisus. They cannot eat these figs until Trumas and Meisus are separated, because the eating of Shabbos gave special significance to these figs, and now you have to separate Trumas and Meisus. For Tananami, we also have a Mishnah that says, "Hamayver te'enim b'chatzeru liktzos." If a person brings over figs to his courtyard in order to dry them out and make fig cakes, so, okay, fine. So in this case, they're not yet done, right? They're not nigmur malachton, right? Their processing is incomplete, right? Right now they're fresh figs. He wants to dry them out so that he can make fig cakes, which means that they're not at the end of their process. They're going to be at the end of their process once they're dried out and made into fig cakes. They haven't yet been dried out. He puts them in his chotzer in order to dry them out and make these fig cakes. So his children and the people in his household can eat from these figs in a temporary manner because they're not yet nigmar malachton. So therefore you can eat from them. They're not yet chayiv in Trumas and Meisus. That even though in general, when you bring, if these figs would be nigmar malachton, if they would already be complete, for example, in the previous case with the kids where they were just planning to eat the figs fresh, so, their processing is done, they're ready to be eaten. So if you would bring that into your courtyard or into your house, well then you would have to separate Trumas and Meisus. Now in this case, even though he brought it into his courtyard, we're talking about figs that are not yet finished being processed because he wants to make them into fig cakes and he's still in the process of drying them out. So therefore, even though he brought it into his courtyard, the people in his family would be able to eat from the figs in a temporary manner. Ufturim, and they would be pater from meiser. Fine. Now, ba'amine rava mirav Nachman. So now Rava asks a kasha from his Rebbe of Nachman, Shabbos mau shetikba muktzeh lemaiser b'davar shlo nigma melachto. Interesting. So, does Shabbos make something that is not nigma melachto chayev in meiser? Meaning, we have seen up until now, we have these kids, right? These kids were setting aside these figs. Now, those figs were already nigma melachto. So we had, right, that meaning because those figs, they were going to eat fresh. There was no more processing that had to be done. And we said in that case, that because they set it aside for Shabbos, well now you have to separate Trumas and Maasros. But that was talking about a situation where it was already Nigma Malachto. Now we also saw this other Mishnah that says that in a case where it's not Nigma Malachto, such as when this fellow sets aside these figs to make into fig cakes and they're not yet done with their processing, bringing them into the Chotzer is not going to make them chayiv in Trumas and Maasros. A chotzer only makes something chayiv in Trumas and Maasros when it's already nigma melachto. So we're trying to figure out that when we say that Shabbos is able to sort of upgrade something to make it to be considered, like keva, right? That now it's going to be chayiv in Trumas and Maasros. That even if I have these, these figs that are out in the field, and I didn't bring them into my house, so therefore I can eat them in a temporary manner. But if I set them aside for Shabbos, so then it becomes like a keva way, a permanent way, and therefore it's chayiv in Trumas and Maasros. So when we say that Shabbos is koveya, is that only like in the example of the kids when those figs were nigmar malachtan, they were at the end of their processing, they weren't going to be processed any further. But what about if you have a fellow who says, you know what, these figs, I'm going to make them into fig cakes. I'm going to dry them out, which means that they're not finished with their process yet. And then he says, and then he sets them aside for Shabbos. So in that case, does Shabbos make it considered like kavua, in which case they would be chayiv in Trumas and Maasros, even though it's not nigma melachton? Or do we say that Shabbos is only koveya for Trumas and Maasros for things that are nigma melachton? So, again, ba'amine Rav Nachman, Rava asked Rav Nachman, Shabbos ma'u shetikba muktzeh lemaiser b'davar shelo nigma melachto. When you have something that's not nigma melachto, such as figs that you're planning to make it to dry out, make into fig cakes, would Shabbos, if you set them aside to be eaten on Shabbos, at least some of them, whatever it is, so would the fact that you're planning to eat them on Shabbos make them now chayiv in Trumas and Maasros, even though they aren't things that are nigma melachto? Mi'aminon, do we say kevin dechsiv v'kras Shabbos oneg? Do we say that since the pasuk says that we will call Shabbos a delight, kava, it makes these fruits keva, permanent, and therefore chayiv in Trumas and Maasros, v'afilu b'davar shelo nigma melachto, even something that is not its work isn't complete. O dilma b'davar shnigma melachto kava, or maybe Shabbos is only koveya for Trumas and Maasros with something that is done with its processing, as we saw with those kids that set aside their figs, b'davar shlo nigma melachto lo kava. But if it's something that is not yet finished with its processing, so then Shabbos would not be koveya for Trumas and Maasros. So Amalei Rav Nachman responds, Shabbos kovas, that Shabbos is going to make something chayiv in Trumas and Maasros, bein b'davar shnigma melachto, right? It's going to make it keva, which therefore makes it chayiv in Trumas and Maasros, bein b'davar shnigma melachto, whether it is something that it has completed its processing, bein b'davar shlo nigma melachto, or whether it is something that has not completed its processing. Either way, Shabbos will be koveya for Trumas and Maasros. So Amalei, Rava says, Ve'ema Shabbos dumi d'chotzer. Rava suggests, however, to Rav Nachman, but maybe we'll say, maybe we treat Shabbos like a chotzer, like a courtyard. Ma chotzer eino kovas el b'davar shnigma melachto, just like as we saw with this fellow who sets aside figs to be made into to be dried out and made into fig cakes. That the chotzer, when he brings it into his courtyard, his family and children are still able to eat from it because its work is not yet done. So Shabbos lo tikba el b'davar shnigma melachto. So also say that just like a courtyard only makes something chayiv in Trumas and Maasros if it's completed its work, but if it hasn't completed its processing, then it doesn't make it chayiv in Trumas and Maasros. So maybe I'll say the same thing about Shabbos. that Shabbos is only able to make something chayiv in Trumas and Maasros when it's already completed its processing, but if it has not yet completed its processing, so then Shabbos would not be koveed for Trumas and Maasros. So Omar Lei, to which Rav Nachman responds, Limud Aruchu B'Yadenu, we already have a organized teachings on this manner. Shabbos kovas ben b'davash nigma malachto ben b'davash lo nigma malachto. That Shabbos is kovea for Trumas and Maasros, whether we're talking about something that is completed its processing, such as fresh figs that you're looking to eat, or whether it's something that is not yet completed its processing, such as figs that you're planning to dry out and make into fig cakes. Either way, Shabbos will be kovea, Shabbos will be mechayev in Trumas and Maasros. Omer Mar Zutra Breidu Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman's son Mar Zutra says, Av Ono Nami Tanina, that we can also derive this from our Mishnah, that Shabbos is kovea. How? V'od Omar Rabbi Eliezer, the Rabbi Eliezer said, Omir Odom ala muktzeh erev Shabbos b'shviz v'chulei, that a fellow could stand over something that is still considered muktzeh, something that has not yet completely finished its processing. And he says that I'm going to eat this on Shabbos, right? So we have these like raisins or figs that sort of are in this state where some people eat them, some people don't. So it's not yet completely finished its processing. And we're saying that it's talking about Shemitah, and it's Friday. And because it's Shemitah, so you don't have to worry about Trumas and Maasros. The only problem is that it'll be muksa if you don't set it aside, because not everybody eats it at this stage. So he sets it aside, and then he can eat it the next day. So time of the Shviz. So it says Mar Zutra, well, the reason, right, the Mishnah goes out of its way to say that when is he setting aside these fruits? On Friday of Shemitah. The fact that it's Shemitah this year is important. Dila bar Yisuriu, because you don't have to worry about Meiser. Implying that if it would have been any other year of the Shemitah cycle, if it would be the first year of the Shemitah cycle, he would not be allowed to simply set aside these, figs on Erev Shabbos and then eat them the next day. My time, outcome, lav mishum the Shabbos kova. So is it not because Shabbos is kovea? Meaning, let's say it's the first year of the Shemitah cycle. So it's not Shemitah, right? Shemitah is year 7, now it's year 1. And you have these figs that are not quite done yet. So it's not nigma malachtan. Now you say, look, I'm going to set them aside so that I can eat them tomorrow. And we're saying that won't work. We're saying if it's the Shemitah year, then it works. Because you don't have to worry about Trumas and Maasros. But if it's any other year, it wouldn't work, because you would have to worry about Trumas and Maasros. Why would I have to worry about Trumas and Maasros? It's not Nigma Malachtan. Why should I have to worry about Trumas and Maasros? You know why? Because since you're setting it aside for Shabbos, Shabbos is Koveya, and now it's going to be Chayiv in Trumas and Maasros, and you're not going to be able to eat it on Shabbos because you didn't yet set aside Trumas and Maasros. So we see that Shabbos is Koveya for Trumas and Maasros, even on something that has not yet completed its processing. The Gemara answer is low. No, that is not why on any other year of the Shemitah cycle you would not be allowed to eat these figs. Shiny awesome. It's different in that case, given the Omer Mikana ni ochel lemocher kavalei ilave. To which the Gemara answers that the reason that any other year of the Shemitah cycle he would be unable to eat these figs has nothing to do with Shabbos being Kovea. It's because he's saying that I'm going to eat these specific figs, I'm going to be eating these figs the next day on Shabbos, means that he gave them significance. The fact that he says, I'm going to be eating these figs the next day, it gives that significance. And because it gives it significance, that's why it's considered kavua. It's considered a proper, not a temporary, but a fixed eating, a permanent way of eating. And that is why it's going to be chayv and maasros. And therefore, any other year of the Shemitah cycle, you would not be allowed to eat these figs next day. On Shemitah, you can eat it. You'll be able to eat these figs because there is no trumas to maasros. But any other year of the Shemitah cycle, you would not be able to eat these figs, because since he said that I'm planning to eat these particular figs, so then it gives it significance, and you would not be allowed to eat them without separating Trumas and Maasros. If that's the case, my area Shabbos afilu b'chol nami. To which the Gemara asks, but if we're just saying that it really has nothing to do with Shabbos being machshiv these fruits, well then, why does this need to be taking place on a Friday? It could be taking place any day of the week. What's the significance of Friday and Shabbos in this context? Right? Meaning you have these fruits. They're not yet nigmara malachtan, but you say that I'm going to be eating these particular fruits, and therefore it gives it significance, and because it gives it significance, it's now chayiv and trumas and maasros. So what's the significance of the fact that that it's Friday over here? So the Gemara answers, well, what we're learning from here is that the only issue is that it's hasn't been separated Trumas and Maasros, meaning that because on Shemitah there's no Trumas and Maasros, therefore, when he sets it aside on Friday for Shabbos, so there's nothing wrong at all with it on Shabbos, right? Meaning there's no Trumas and Maasros because it's Shemitah. It's now Friday. He says, "Look, I'm going to eat these figs tomorrow." Givaldik, he can eat the figs. There's nothing to be concerned about. Now, if it were to be any other year of the Shemitah, what we're saying is that, well, it's going to be a problem. Because since he's saying that I'm going to be eating these particular figs the next day, he's giving significance to these particular figs. And therefore, since he's giving it significance, it's going to be considered like keva. And because it's keva, it's going to be chayiv and trumas and maasros. What's the significance of the fact that it's going to be Shabbos tomorrow? The significance is that the only issue over here is that you haven't yet separated trumas and maasros, but there's an elephant in the room. What's the elephant in the room? What about the fact that it would also be muktzah? Because since you're a machshav it, now it's chayiv and trumas and maasros. So shouldn't you say that would be considered muktzeh? And if it's muktzeh, so it's not just that it's going to be chayiv and trumas and maasros, but it's also going to be muktzeh the next day. But we don't say anything about the fact that it's going to be muktzeh. We're only focusing on the fact of trumas and maasros. So what do we see? So we see that muktzeh isn't actually an issue over here. Because I may have had the habit to say that the fact that we don't separate trumas and maasros on Shabbos is actually midoraisa, that I'm mamish not allowed to separate trumas and maasros on Shabbos, which would mean that if I can't separate trumas and maasros on Shabbos, so then these figs would also be muktzah machmas isur, because I'm not allowed to separate trumas and maasros. Therefore, it's also muktzah from the fact that we say that there's no problems of muktzah over here. The only problem is that you have to separate trumas and maasros, but we're not saying that it's muktzah machmas isur. So it must mean that that it's that really the only issue over here is meiser, and it's not, the issue is not that it would also be considered muktzah. The fact that he had set it aside to be eaten the next day is enough to make it not muktzah. The only issue over here is that he hasn't yet separated trumas and maasros. Okay, givaldig. That was Daf Lamed Daled of Masechta Beitzah. We got the beeping of the laundry machine in the background. It's very annoying. I've tried so many times to figure out how to turn off the beeping, but it seems like something that's not really possible. Okay, very nice. So, friends, what do we talk about? So really the first amud of the daf really talked about that when the Mishnah had said that you're not allowed to heat up a tile and cook on that in Yom Tov. The question is, why not? So we had said that, we're talking about a new tile, and there were two options for why you would not be allowed to use a new tile. One of them is that it hasn't been tested yet, and if you put it into the fire, it might break. And the second reason is that, a new tile, the first time you put it into the fire, it actually strengthens it, makes it into a proper tile, so therefore we don't want you doing it for that reason. Then we got into this next Mishnah, which really talks about a very interesting sugya about if Shabbos is able to be machshiv, right? If the eating on Shabbos is not considered temporary. Memela, the eating on Shabbos is considered kavua, permanent, and therefore if you have, let's say, fruits that normally you'd be allowed to eat in a temporary manner without separating trumas and maasros, if you separate them on if you put them aside in order to eat them on Shabbos, so we said that then memele that makes it chashuv, and if it's chashuv, then it's going to be chayiv in trumas and maasros. The question that Rava asked of Nachman was, well, when we say that if you put it aside for Shabbos, it makes it significant in chayiv and trumas and maasros, is that only once it was nigmar malachton, such as if you wanted to eat the figs fresh? But what if you planned to make them into like fig cakes, so they're not completed with their processing yet? Would we say that the fact that you set them aside to be eaten on Shabbos, would that make it significant? Would Shabbos make it significant even for something that has not yet completed its processing? And Rav Nachman wanted to say, yes, it would. That Shabbos would be able to give significance even for something that has not yet completed its processing. Okay, fine. And then Mar Zutra, Rav Nachman's son, tried to bring a proof from our Mishnah, but where things stand right now, we'll have to pick up from here tomorrow, but where things stand right now, we're not necessarily able to bring a proof from our Mishnah that Shabbos is able to be koveya, even things that are not yet nigmar malachton. Friends, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.